Hello everyone, it's Jin'taan here, and today I'm going to be going over the second week of the Winter War, which has seen some consistent, if not quite as grandstanding fighting as the preceding one. I'm going to specifically call it the second week, as in retrospect we can really say that the start of this conflict was on the 26th of December, which is when we saw the first conflicts between the Mjolnir Coalition and Goonswarm Federation over their citadels that were being placed in catch as an attempt to basically provide themselves a strong logistics route into the region, which would become, as is now, the main theatre of the war. And whilst that obviously wasn't successful, it does kind of indicate itself as the first set piece of the conflict. So I'm going to use that as kind of the marker of where we begin here. But before I go into the exact nature of the fighting that's taken place since my last update, I want to kind of give everyone a heads up on people who've started to enter the fray, as it were. Cue splashy intro. So once again, Mercenary Coalition have found themselves involved in one of the biggest touchstone wars of EVE, having been hired here by the Mjolnir Coalition to provide support on the ground for their invasion. This is particularly interesting seeing as Mercenary Coalition were recently hired by PanFam to engage in the Tribute War where they evicted CO2 and Test, whom they are now helping to procure a home in the south. And, whilst I'm unaware of the contract's details, they have been seen in significant numbers in every major timer and engagement in the war since they have been hired. So, as long as Test and CO2 can keep up the payments, they have another powerful ally to add to their already large coalition. As from what I understand, Mercenary Coalition refuses to renege on a contract already signed until the completion of it, and as such Goonswarm will not be able to outbid for their loyalties. The second new belligerent to enter the fray within the south is the Drone Region Federation. Now I mentioned these guys in my original video, A Prelude to a Winter War, and my original analysis of the political differences between them and Steinwagen still holds strong. But to recap, they see Steinwagen as effectively stealing sections of the Russian-speaking community that they see as their own, both pilots and potential renters here. This has manifested previously, with the DRF supporting the Vanguard Coalition in their previous invasion of the Steinwagen Coalition. This led to significant territorial losses from the Steinwagen Coalition. Interestingly, however, outside of Infinity Space, most of the Drone Region Federation alliances have not been seen within Catch, instead focusing their attentions on some of the outlying regions of the Steinwagen Coalition, whilst they are being kept busy in Catch by many other attacking forces, allowing them to chip away at some more of the outlying territories of Steinwagen, as they cannot effectively contest this invasion, which has led to them taking a couple of stations in Fetherbolus, as well as moving to reinforce several other systems. Whether or not this will force Steinwagen to fight a war on two fronts has yet to be seen, but they have been spotted in some of the more cornerstone single-point fights, such as the F4R2 Fortizar fight, and the VTAC-3 station and iHub timer fights, which we will talk about later. So the huge numbers of subcap pilots that they can bring should not be discounted here. The final and most interesting addition to the theatre, however, has to be PanFam, who have managed to fractitiously involve themselves in the conflict in a way that I find particularly peculiar, as ever since the founding of Horde, Pandemic Legion, NC Dot, and their surrounding allies have all seemed to work in concert, or from the same playbook at the very least. Whereas here we've seen involvement on both sides from different entities within the PanFam coalition, with NC Dot seeming to work alongside the Steinfragen coalition, and PL having been seen working in support of Stain Swarm, though both they, Horde, and Waffles claim that they are simply third-partying the conflict, which will sound humorously familiar to those of you who were involved in the Hero War, wherein PL started off by third-partying a conflict between Proviblock and Hero Coalition, only to later come around and become a first party in and of themselves and invade Hero Coalition. I don't anticipate them using the same playbook here, as they already have significant holdings in Tribute that they will need to keep their super capitals in range of to defend. However, I don't see anyone in this coalition turning down the opportunity to gather some dank frags from the local combatants. It should also be noted for those of you who take Reddit a tiny bit too seriously that the quote-unquote leak of a PanFam deployment to the south for the conflict was in fact a ruse, and you have been had. Their primary mode of transport to the south so far having been wormholes. So, with the stage set and our new actors announced, let's take a look at the theatre itself, Catch. First of all, here is Catch as we left it last update, just after the F4R2 Fortizar fight, and here it is after just 5 days of continuous conflict in the south. And whilst it might not seem like much compared to the size of Catch overall, the territory that exchanged hands is relatively important, and furthermore definitely demonstrates the difference between Dominion, with its hard-fought, static and unchanging battle lines that very, very quickly devolve as a situation grows out of hand, to Fozisov's more fluid back-and-forth territorial exchanges. In fact, the war has been so fast-paced that I've actually had to keep a war diary just to keep track of what fights have been going on, where they've been occurring, and what they've been occurring over. And let me tell you, it is not a short diary at this point. Thankfully, however, I can go through this in little bite-sized chunks. So let's start with the most drastic of territorial changes in the south of Catch, near Quirius. This area, until recently, was held by the Tactical Voltage Coalition, led by 47, whose heavy AU time zone presence and willingness to fight at seemingly all hours had allowed them to eke out a significant amount of territory in the south of Catch, which happened to be right along the most important lines of logistics for Stainswarm, given how important Quirius is as a logistics route for the Red Swarm Federation. As such, this was made a priority to deal with by the Stainswarm Coalition, with both the Red Swarm Federation's moderate AU time zone presence and some very, very dedicated Russians being able to successfully re-annex their lost territories during the war. However, the difficult task of rooting out all of the citadels that Tactical Voltage had placed in the area remains to be completed, so I wouldn't expect to see Tactical Voltage disappear from the battle reports anytime in the near future, much to the glee of super builders and dread builders alike. So, with that area of the theatre covered, let's move on to something that isn't quite as visible on the map, which is the Steinfragen Coalition's focus on destabilising the north of Catch. This truly kicked off on the 3rd of January, with all of the major forces of the Steinfragen Coalition working together to force Intosis timers in several of these northern Catch systems. Though this was obviously contested by Stain's Swarm and led to several small skirmishy engagements along the way. And whilst those fights were pretty much impossible to declare a winner for, the fact remained that Steinfragen had achieved their initial objective. But when these timers came out on the 5th of January, they found themselves unable to effectively capitalise on them. Perhaps due simply to the fact that this was one of the hottest days of the conflict so far, in terms of just sheer length of combat, with fighting spreading all around time zones, from both the AU time zone final timers, as precipitated by the Tactical Voltage Coalition's SOV in the south, midday incursions on the Oceanic and Russian time zone timers that were being held by the Stain Swarm Coalition, and all rounded off by EU time zone timers of the aforementioned Volt SOV in the north of Catch, totaling about 16 hours of constant skirmishing and fighting in Catch, with FCs swapping out as they had to go, and fights going back and forth as pilots logged in and logged off. One of the most interesting intricacies of this timer that I can bring up, however, is simply the difference in doctrines that is being used to set up the timer, as opposed to then contesting the timer later as it comes out. And this is one of the ways in which we can see Fozisov working, for better or ill, towards its intent, as the initial Intosis requires single-point concentrations of force to deal with, as there is only one objective and all you have to do is hold that one grid down. But when the timer comes up, you're forced to spread around several different grids, all across the constellation that has been affected by the Intosis warfare, which puts far more emphasis on strategic mobility in terms of fleet composition. What this means is that you see a lot more cruisers, battle cruisers, and battleships for the initial contestation of timers, followed up with more frigates, jackdaws, and other lighter ships when it comes to the actual entosising of a whole constellation. As we mentioned before, however, there are ways to make Tosis warfare into a more static single point of conflict engagement. However, neither side seems willing to commit to such an engagement at the current time, most likely due to the risks simply outweighing the benefits, as if either side commits and is then completely wiped in the field by a superior opponent force, it would open the door to them being completely steamrolled. A good real-world analogue to compare this to would have to be mutually assured destruction, as it was implemented within nuclear diplomacy, as the tentative balance of supercapital powers of the two blocks ensures that an escalation is never beneficial for either side until they can ensure victory. So, changing gears from a successful defense that was almost invisible to a successful offensive move by the Stain-Fraggin coalition, which has been talked about to great length by almost everyone involved in the conflict. Specifically here, I'm talking about the Test and CO2-led push, which gave them a beachhead in the Curse entrance area, namely both 1P TAC and F4R2, with progress being made in the other systems of the constellation. The strategic implications of this are relatively similar to what was talked about with regards to the F4R2 citadels, with the only major difference being the type of fighting that was required to be able to gain said beachhead. It's worth noting here, however, that the real prize is still F4R2, as 1P TAC does not offer a significant amount of coverage with regards to capital movement. As such, I expect to see bitter fighting take place over the F4R2 station soon, both to lock out any assets that might be held there, and also to provide another safe haven for the attacking forces. However, the fighting this week was not just contained to Catch, and in fact we saw some of the first spillovers into other regions this week, with both a concerted effort from the Drone Region Federation to harass and raid some of the outlying territories of Stainswarm, specifically targeting the system 3L3N-X, which is primarily the jumping off point for the FCON-led Phoenix Federation into the conflict zone of Catch. This implies a desire on Stainswarm's part to start to split up the allies that are now facing them in the Stain-Fraggin coalition, as being able to control regional gates gives one a huge advantage in terms of capital logistics, so taking these away from the offensive forces would have huge value to their abilities to escalate safely without any fore-preparation having been done by the Stain-Fraggin coalition to purposely thwart that. The attack, however, was decidedly unsuccessful, with Stainswarm fleets in the theatre taking heavy losses, and being unable to make any more than temporary progress in terms of entosis. However, I would expect to see more of this going forwards, in an attempt to both draw resources away from Catch, from the Stain-Fraggin allies, and to as heavily disrupt movement throughout regions as possible, given that the main advantage that Stainswarm has is the fact that they are already concentrated in a single region, from which they can defensively project their power. All this conflict, however, was building to a single timer, one that I expect you're all very familiar with now. The VTAC-3 station and iHub timers. These came out of reinforcement on Russian Orthodox Christmas Day, from what I understand. A factor heavily capitalized on by Test's expansive propaganda wing. Not that it seemed to impact the Russians' ability to form large numbers in their prime time at all. It seems that internet spaceships really are serious business. The reason for this timer's importance, however, is relatively simple. VTAC-3 has been a long-standing staging system for not only Steinwagen, but also previous Russian-led coalitions in the south, which meant that despite panicked evacing, there was still going to be a large quantity of assets left in that station if it was to be taken. And as such, we saw some of the fiercest fighting we've seen so far in the war, with untold hundreds of interceptors warping around in an attempt to scour any entosises but their own from the universe, whilst further hundreds and maybe even thousands of players waited for the slightest hint of escalation so that they could dogpile in and completely annihilate the enemy, or so they hoped. It was a truly back and forth affair during the fight, with it hovering between 60 and 90% for the vast majority of the 4-hour-long entosis fight. And yet, at the end of it all, we didn't quite get a conclusive victory on either side, with Stainswarm being able to save their station, yes, but losing their iHub in the system as well. For those who are not up to date on their fuzzy sov mechanics, the iHub is effectively what gives a system ADM, or Activity Defense Multiplier, which makes a system easier to defend if it is being attacked. Now that this is under control of the Stain-Fraggin coalition, any further attacks on VTAC-3 are going to be made substantially easier. And as such, the siege will likely continue for a good few days to come, as only one victory is needed to seal away huge sections of Stainswarm assets. Fortunately, however, they have been able to move a large quantity of these assets to a nearby Fortizar, once again showing how critical citadels are to the modern Sov warfare system, as they provide a defensible staging point which can be held independently of any sovereignty in the area, making headshots like this VTAC-3 attempt less powerful as a tool. However, as Stainswarm are now likely acutely aware, not all victories are won on the battlefield, with not just one but two staging Fortizars being acquired by the Stain-Fragging coalition without a single timer or shot being fired. The first being the well-known Plan B that Test had previously boasted about as making F4R2 effectively pointless, and whilst it still operates under the flag of Lumpy, which is one of the most prominent independent catch entities, its control has effectively been given over to the Stain-Fraggin coalition, with all of its allied forces being seen docking and operating from MB-TAC. And whilst rumours of Lumpy's payment are currently unsubstantiated, they do now hold a sizable amount of the SOV previously held by Tenal Control Unit in the north, so I can't help but postulate that there was in fact some trade there. The second citadel, however, was acquired through rather mercantile means, being simply purchased from its owner within the Volition cult. By Test Alliance, please ignore. And whilst the exact circumstances of this sale are heavily disputed by both sides, it represents another spoke in the umbrella of Stain-Fraggin capital projection over the region, which, when ranges are considered from these two Fortizars, looks something like this, leaving only the very southernmost regions of Catch as a safe haven from Stain-Fraggin projection, and even then only being 1 mid away. This expansion is slowly starting to whittle away at Stainswarm capital supremacy within the region, as whilst they do technically have one of the larger forces in the area, the question remains how many losses are they willing to take to this force, as one battle will not effectively decide the war in terms of this conflict. As such, I could not help but feel like we are entering a very interesting part of the war, an almost Verdun or Stalingrad-esque industrialized stalemate, where both forces are going to be just pushing fleets against one another in a tug of war to see whose resources give out first, be it morale, money, or machinery. But that about sums up the major actions in the war zone over the past 5 days. Like I said, hell of a week, huh? Thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this update, and please don't forget to subscribe if you want to see more of this style of video content, and feel free to let me know if you have any corrections or things I've missed over the course of my update. I'd also love to thank the people who donated ISK to me after my last update. I never really expected anything like that, so thank you very much. But I'd like to end this one up with a little query to the Russian speakers who are watching this video. I see a fair amount of Russian comments on my past ones, so I'd like to leave an open offer that if anyone wishes to try and translate this video into Russian or any other foreign language, I would be happy to provide whatever assistance I can in doing so. With that said though, fly smart and take care.